Alrighty. Well, let's get started. I'll give you the floor, Jackie.
Hi everybody. Welcome to our first workshop of storytelling basics. If you can't hear somebody, please put in the chat that we are being low or there's technical problems so we can look into it. Um, my name is Jackie Hayden now. I am a WPI board member and have been for as long as I can remember. In terms of STing, my background experiences, I've been an AST for several games. I did more administrative stuff for games, and then I've run a one shot this past November.
And I am Pete Fitzpatrick. I am also with the WPI board. I am the board secretary. My LARP writing experience goes back a long time with Wilmark Dynasty. I've run murder mysteries nearly on the year every year, and also some consistent parlor games. So both of us have a bit of experience with regards to storytelling and some of the basics that go into it. So we wanted to lay out this presentation to see how folks were interested in it, and also have something to throw up on socials to help with regards to training and other things of that nature. So if you're fascinated or interested in this, we'll have a survey at the end. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end. Any questions that you have, we have everyone muted and off camera because we don't want the workshop to be interrupted, but we'll be taking questions at the end for anyone that has them. So with that said, let's get started here. So Jackie, if you want to go over the agenda.
We're going to, there's a lot of things that go into storytelling, and we determined very early on that you can't do all of them in one session. Otherwise, you'd be here for hours, and none of us want to do that. So we started with the very basics. So we're going to go into, uh, obviously, what kind of story we're going through, the type of games that you might be playing or writing, what we are calling the three-act plot, which people get into, NPCs, how to run plots, and then tips and takeaways until we get to our next session. Um, Pete?
Yeah, the thing is that running a persistent game and some of the other takeaways, we began to do a basics of STing workshop, and we really had to almost cut it directly in half. So we wanted to sort of front load the items on, where to get started and some of the tips and tricks that we know to be able to get something off the ground. So we'll get started here with types of games.
Yep. So obviously, when you're running a game, the first big thing you're going to do is world building. That might be pulling from a setting material that already exists. It might be creating something out the box of your own. It might be developing a specific city center in a larger world. But that's sort of where you start, and then you kind of build the game from there. Um, anything? There we go. So when you have whatever world you're starting with, you want to figure out what type of game you want to run. And there's a couple different kinds that we usually see, especially around the parallel LARP setting. So the first one that we talk about is what we did in November. We did a one shot. That's where you have a one usually day game or maybe one weekend game, where it happens one time. That's all it's playing, and it's once it's done, it's done. Um, After that, next that's a little bit bigger is going to be a multi-session game. Usually, I see that between 2 and maybe 6 sessions, where you've got a little bit more of a storyline, but it's not something that goes on for years. Obviously, then the last one is something that we call a persistent campaign. That's probably more than 6 sessions. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 6 years, whatever it might be. But it's something that's supposed to have a little bit more longevity to it as opposed to a one and done situation. Um, Regardless of the type of game that you're doing, the singular session itself all sort of follows the same type three-act structure when you're trying to get it off the ground.
Yeah, and we want to go a little bit into the three-act structure here. Most all games, be it even your tabletop games, should follow roughly the three-act structure of storytelling. And this goes over a couple of different items. You have a setup, and what the setup does is it introduces the world, the characters, the stakes. It establishes, normally in like a television series, the protagonist's normal life before things change. So for example, if you were talking about Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen was living in District 12, struggling to survive in a dystopian society. Um, Usually, in the setup, there is an inciting incident. For example, in the one I just gave, her sister is chosen for the Hunger Games, and now she has to volunteer as tribute. So this really is you are setting up the status quo and giving everyone a chance to introduce their characters and also have you introduce the NPCs and begin to set the confrontation up that's going to be happening in Act Two. And this can, be 45 minutes in a parlor game. This can be multiple games in a multi-session game, or this can be up to the first year of a multi-chronicle game. The next portion is the confrontation. This is usually your longest act in any movie, game, anything of that sort, where conflict, tension, and character growth occur. Um, they begin to face obstacles and run into supporting characters, subplots. Um, Oftentimes, there are twists involved here, but the thing is that you're building up towards Act Three. So whereas you may have some mini conflicts and things that sort, it should be a rising conflict towards something greater. So, for example, if we wanted to talk about Star Wars, over time, each of those movies in the original trilogy really sets it up really well because you set up in while each movie had its own three-act structure, you had A New Hope, which was setting up the world. You had The Empire Strikes Back, which is the confrontation, and the PCs meet all sorts of conflict that leads to a rising confrontation in the resolution that leads to the downfall of the Empire. And really, that's what Act Three is about. It's about the climax that brings the players to the final push towards their goal, whatever that goal you may have made as a storyline. And the biggest challenge is faced head on, leading to either victory or failure. Some storylines, end up with some sort of wild gang ending, and everyone dies in the end. But one of the things that you want to make sure is that it's satisfying. It ties up loose ends and shows the new normal. Oftentimes, there is a sort of epilogue that will go over just sort of wrapping everything up. Like, for example, in Return of the Kings, Frodo and Sam reach Mount Doom. The final conflict is that Frodo succumbs to the ring. Gollum ultimately causes its destruction. And the resolution is you get to see all of that at the end with regards Aragorn becoming the king, the hobbits return home, but then you know, in the books there's a little bit more that happens, but not to go into all of that. That being said, you need to look at it and say, what is it that you want the payoff to be? Now, this is the structure that you're going to put towards things, but you don't want to be writing the story for the players. They need a degree of agency, and we're going to be going into that here as we move forward.
So before we pop to non-player characters, I just want to add for the three-act structure portion.
Yeah.
Um, this it's not just there's going to be lots of different plots that are going to follow the three-act structure. So I'm going to steal this from an old Jeremy story that he's going to laugh at me about later. But when we think of a long-standing, persistent campaign, we like to try to think of it like a TV show. Each game session might be an episode, and each episode's going to have its own setup, confrontation, resolution, because that might be a plot that's for that night. But also, the beginning of the first year is going to be like season one. At the beginning of the year, you're going to set some stuff up, and it's going to rise and it's going to fall over the course of the year. And then similarly for the entire campaign, all right, you've gotten through season one, season two. but something you set up in season one might show up at season five when the whole game concludes.
Mhm.
So it's running games like that is a lot of different three-act structure plots that take up the entirety of your game.
Yeah, you might be threading multiple ones. For example, you may have a Monster of the Week episode. That's a lot like the old X-Files or an old Buffy episode. That one episode is going to follow a three-act structure, but you may layer in something that sets the tone for something later on. So it's a good point to make, Jackie.
Thank you. So now that you've got your world basic set up, what do you have to do with it? You've got buildings, you got cities, but now you also need your NPCs. And you make NPCs so that your PCs have someone to interact with, someone to talk to. And those NPCs can be wildly different things. Um, thank you. So when you're talking about your NPCs, you want to help build the life of your world. They might look like quest givers that enhance your plots or give out information. It might just be something that runs around in the background. Hospitals have people that work at them. Coffee shops have baristas. When your players are running around your world, there are going to be people around them, just like you'd see in a lot of video games. Now, things to think about when you're creating your NPCs, they're supposed to be like people. They're supposed to have things that they want, things that they do, reasons that they do things, similar to PCs. You're just making a lot of them. Um, Something that we suggest for your NPCs is that maybe they have some secrets when your players are interacting with them. Maybe they have some deep dark secret that drives what they do. That's something the player can interact with, and it helps enhance your story and theirs. And then we talk about a sphere of power for your NPC. Yes, there's going to be an NPC that's just, I hand out coffee every morning, that's what I do. But also, there might be NPCs that are, in the mayor's office, running the police force, whatever they might do, they might control something that the players have to uh, get around or get through. And so having them have a sphere of power that they enhance gives players something else to interact with. The main note that we want to make for NPCs is that when you're running the game, you're running it for the players. So you want to make sure that the PCs are the stars of the game and that the NPCs are the things that they get to interact with. Um, and we want to encourage to understand that NPCs are going to die. And players can be rough with NPCs, and it's okay because the point is to run the game for the players.
Absolutely. That doesn't mean don't make lethal NPCs. That doesn't mean make NPCs that are threats, and that doesn't mean that the players can't get knocked around by them or killed. But the thing therein is that you don't want to ever run into a situation where you get too attached to an NPC and they quote unquote can't die, or you make them seem in the player's eyes almost BS for what they can do or everything they do. It seems like supernatural that they know things. You really do want to make sure that you avoid some of those pitfalls. Um, a few notes with regards to some of these effective NPC items is that once you give them a motivation, a secret, or a sphere of power, or something similar, you really can help develop your campaign world. For example, I wanted to develop a village that the villagers had a secret. And so I made all of the villagers, or most of them, secretly were rats, or some of the family members were rats, and they were trying to hide this fact. But then they had a thriving cheese industry because they wanted to make sure that they kept the rats happy and things of that sort. So, and then when the players got there, they thought that was kind of weird that they're really into cheese in this. So just like little things of that sort can help with regards to world building and also can help with regards to how you can move forward with your plot. Speaking of such, we'll go over just in general some items with regards to how to run a plot and just a few pointers on items to get started if you're running, any of the types, either parlor game, multi-session, or chronicle. So a few things that you want to do for starters is preparing for your players. In general, this is understanding your audience. Now, when you do a convention, oftentimes you won't necessarily know who your audience is. So you will have to write probably more generically. But if you know your player group, then you can oftentimes tailor suit to their play styles and also make some anticipations with regards to the style of game that they would want or the style of game that they would like to interact with. This can be daunting at times. Some people will send out surveys. Some people will just, again, speak to their players one-on-one or have them submit it with their character submissions. But more experienced storyteller will oftentimes be able to extrapolate based off of their player base if they're a regular player base. Um, you need to understand when you're preparing for your players what their experience levels are, what their preferences are, and potentially what could be triggering with regards to your players because certain groups of people are perhaps adversive to certain types of plots. I don't want to say like this is not a great example, but for example, I would probably not introduce a clown NPC to various different games because you never know who's going to have a clown phobia. That's that's a really basic way of saying that you need to sort of, when you're writing, think to those sorts of items and lay out your trigger warnings to your players when you not only are preparing the game, but also at the start of the game. You need to identify potentially sensitive themes. Usually, a lot of games will have some sort of element of violence, horror, but if there's anything involving personal trauma or anything of that sort, you need to have a content warning with regards to that, as you need to definitely lay out expectations. We use the OK check-in system here in WPI, but many different play groups have different means of pre-session consent discussions, X cards or thumbs up, thumbs down. Again, we explain our system at the beginning of every single LARP, and we oftentimes encourage folks to do the same thing.
I'm going to jump in
Sure.
for trigger warning. One example of something that we have done as a trigger warning in games, we had a session where there was going to be a very intense scene. It was a Sabbat game, and there's going to be a lot of blood and gore, like literally on the ground, because we had a lot of fake materials. We made sure before we started the scene to go out of character, note this was going to be a trigger warning, so that people could choose to leave the room in character if they so, out of character if they so chose. That way they could be comfortable and everybody else in the room could be comfortable as well. So that is just an example of something you might do during your games as a trigger warning where you know it's going to be very intense or very visual.
Agreed, 100%. Similarly, making sure to clarify game mechanics and conflict resolution methods is great there. With our OK check-in system, if someone needs to hand off their sheet to a storyteller to run for a scene, that's made available to them. You do want to make sure to set boundaries for player versus player conflict, sort of metagaming and role play intensity for those sorts of things, because some folks can get really intense with regards to their characters and experience what we refer to as bleed, which is sort of a element where you begin to feel what your character's feeling, and we try to mitigate those instances as best we can with those tools. Next up, though, speaking of player agency, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. You need to prepare for improvisation. Players will find solutions you did not anticipate, and you need to make sure to give players meaningful choices that impact the world and the story. Now, my old writing partner was a big proponent of railroading, which is he would try to force the players down a path, and he would sort of, if they deviate from the path, he would bring them back to it. He might try to do various different set dressing to try to jazz it up so that players wouldn't know that they're being railroaded. But I was always a proponent of chaos theory, where let the players do whatever they want and see where the story goes. Oftentimes, you need to have probably a little bit of both in order to make sure that things just don't go completely off the rails with regards to the story that you're trying to tell. But that being said, if a planned event doesn't fit their choices, adapt instead of forcing it. And you should oftentimes think of various different means and methods that the players can do to address the conflict, but there's going to be stuff that you're just not prepared for. So you're going to need to think on your feet. Ultimately, again, uh, player choices matter, and both successes and failures shape the world, by the way. uh, you oftentimes can reward failure. You can almost fail up in a way, because failing doesn't necessarily mean that the story ends. It just means that, like in the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, the turtles get attacked by the Foot Clan and they have to retreat for a time period, and Splinter's captured. That just gives them an opportunity to develop their characters more, and then sets up the villain better for conflict in the later act. So
Mhm.
let failure drive the narrative forward rather than stopping progress entirely. And that helps with that a lot.
I'd say for the railroading concept, there's times and places for it, right? If you're
Mm.
trying to get them to go to one spot, maybe every door leads to Rome. That might be an instance where you can do, quote, keep them on the tracks. But also, again, with the failing up, all right, you've introduced your NPC, you're very proud of it. It's one of the main ones, and it has a sheet, so your players decide to kill it immediately. Okay, well that's unfortunate for your plot, but there are things you can do with that. Probably they have a backup. They might have a brother. They might have something that the players have stolen that now the group needs to get back. You can sort of adapt your plot probably after game so that the train keeps on moving even if it went a little bit east.
Absolutely. They may have beaten the bad for now, but the war may still be on, and there could be some further consequences down the line.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
Go ahead.
and going to this point, and it sort of ties into the previous ones, is that you know, as you look around the room and see your players interacting with the plot and the NPCs and helping with the world building, it's a great point to sort of check in and see if they're engaged.
Yep. So, you know, players come to game to socialize, to interact with their friends, their enemies, the various NPCs that you've brought in. And if they're sitting in the corner on their phone, now maybe they just need a minute, but it might just be that they need a little bit of a push to help them get involved in game. And this is going to be especially true for newer players. It is everybody probably remembers that first time they came into the game, they just didn't know what to do. Um, so when you're an ST and you're looking at your room and you see your new players that aren't engaged, maybe that's the time to approach them with an NPC. Maybe that's the time to grab an experienced player and shove them at them so that they have someone to establish them in game. Maybe that's using something on their sheet. Most STs have access to all the sheets. Do they get a phone call? Do they get someone worried about them? Does their house explode while no one's looking? There are things you can do to try to get them involved and get them engaged in the game that you're trying to play.
Absolutely. I'll cite, I just got back from running a murder mystery not too long ago, and we had several pieces of evidence built that were very specifically, if a PC is just standing around and just staring at the wall or something like that, we had some items that they would notice. In the event, and some of them were, sort of quasi-damning pieces of evidence towards other players. And so instantly, what that does is that gives them something. They're like, oh, I've got something special plot wise. And then it also gives them a means to either start scheming behind the person they got the evidence against, or they go and they confront the person they got the evidence on. You've instantly created a moment where you have re-engaged them into the plot, and it helps to make them feel more part of what's going on. Now, sometimes they're just going to sit on it, like they're just going to be like, well, they don't want to share it or anything of that sort. You're going to run into instances of that sort, but you do want to try to use all of your tools at your disposal to attempt to engage your players. And you want to be prepared for players that aren't engaged, because that's going to happen at nearly every single game.
Yep. By add on to this, somewhat on topic, if you are giving plot out to players, Make sure you have multiple avenues. I would never stick one plot with one player because they will inevitably be sick.
Yes, making sure that that piece of evidence that you give to that one person could possibly be given to multiple people. Generally, a good idea. Redundancy is never a bad thing. You do want to have special items for some of your players, but also, like we said, no plan survives battle with the enemy or contact with the enemy, and so you end up needing to improvise sometimes.
Yeah.
Share the plot is very important. That's something more for players than storytellers. We had someone trying to bogart plot at the murder mystery, and they nearly didn't find out who the murderer was because they tried to keep it away from everyone. And so that's secrets are meant to come out, and plot is meant to be shared and dealt with. Sometimes you want a level of secrecy, and absolutely, but oftentimes you'll find that it's more interesting the other way around. So, but that being said, with chat sort of chiming in, that sort of comes to the end of the presentation. Um, does anyone have any questions for Jackie and me, or any points that they want to make that we maybe missed? Any tips and tricks that anyone had with regards to the basics of storytelling? No pressure for folks because we definitely have hit about the exact amount of time that we wanted to run as well. So this is awesome.
Yep. And then I'll note while people are thinking about that after the presentation, for both the people here and the people that are watching later, we're going to put out a feedback form. We're hoping to do a couple more of these down the line. Some probably ST, the continuation of this, but also we are looking at future topics and future classes. So we'd ask that you please fill out the form. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, if this was the perfect amount of time or you wanted 3 hours of us. But also the kind of things that you want to see going forward, that might be interesting, or just things that you want to learn more about.
Yeah, thank you for the comments on dealing with bored players. It really is something that a lot more STs should definitely think on. And to that point, also making sure that your game is staffed properly so that players aren't backlogged and bored, because that can also occur. We didn't necessarily touch on that, but that's another good point to make is that if players are sitting around in the main game space waiting to go on missions and all the STs are taken up and it's taking forever, that can be a frustration as well. So something that we definitely recommend folks to be properly staffed for. And
Yep.
we'll talk about staffing and logistics in part two. I believe that's what we sort of pushed over to that point. We want to just talk about world building here.
I mean, yeah, if I was going to do a storytelling thing, there's definitely going to be a piece on logistics. That's, my form. So,
Absolutely. All right. Well, if no one else has any other questions, that'll be it for the presentation. We thank you guys for popping in. And again, please, the feedback form is in chat. I'm going to leave the meeting open here for a few minutes in case you want to copy that over. We will also put the form in the Discord as well. And when we post the YouTube video, we'll have the form available as well, just because we'll try to be casting as wide a net as possible for feedback. But thank you all.
thank you for joining us on a Thursday.
Absolutely. Here, I'm going to pause and stop the recording.